Do you feel like you're barely keeping your head above water? That no matter how hard you try, meaningful progress remains out of reach? Heather gets that. She battled an eating disorder for years before seeking help. Now in recovery, Heather is here to tell you that positive change is possible even when it doesn't feel that way. Join her as she shares openly about her struggles and small triumphs. Fair warning though, Heather doesn't hold back. Her candid story may trigger some. But for those wanting honesty, hope, and healing, this is 1% Better with Heather. The information and stories shared on 1% Better are based on host Heather's personal experiences with eating disorders and mental health challenges. Heather is not a licensed doctor, therapist, dietitian, or other health professional. Her advice and opinions should not be taken as professional medical advice. Please consult your physician or a qualified health provider regarding any medical or health-related issues. 1% Better also contains descriptions of eating disorders that may be triggering for some listeners. Discretion is advised.
Hey there, my little gaffers, and welcome to 1% Better with Heather. Today I have a special guest, Edie Warrior Mom, as she's known on TikTok. For the next couple episodes, Edie Warrior Mom will share how she got pulled into this eating disorder hell. No questions off limits. She will speak about her daughter and their experience with the eating disorder recovery system, how this disease affected her family. She will also be discussing her faith in a higher power and how that helped her get through this eating disorder hell. It takes a brave person to come onto a worldwide podcast and air your dirty laundry, so to speak. I applaud her for this. Now, without any further ado, here is Edie Warrior Mom. Hey there, my little gappers, and welcome to 1% Better with Heather. I have a very special guest today. I have, as she's known on social media, Edie Warrior Mom. She is back again by popular demand. Welcome, Edie Warrior Mom.
Hi, Heather. Thank you. I'm really excited to be back.
Well, I'm glad you're here. So let's just recap for the new people coming in. The last time you were here, we were talking about your daughter's eating disorder and how she went to treatment centers and how your family supported her. Do you want to just give a little bit of a synopsis on that?
Sure. So the reason why I'm here and talking about this important topic is for about the past 3 years, our 19-year-old daughter, she was younger than that then, has been struggling with an eating disorder. And while she is doing really well now, I think she would describe herself as in recovery and just, living life as she was meant to live. We have had lots of ups and downs over those 3 years. And those ups and downs have included a couple of admissions to a residential eating disorder treatment program. And so we have learned a lot over those 3 years. And I think my mission now is to talk about that. And I know that many parents were in my situation 3 years ago, and you feel helpless. You don't know what to do. And you're looking around for some kind of guidebook that will help you navigate this well. And so I'm trying to talk about that, and hopefully in the process, I can help others.
So let's just dive right in. What are your takeaways from your first time being here? What did you learn? The good things that happened, and then if you're comfortable sharing the bad things.
From the first appearance on your podcast, I was nervous. It was really the first time that I put our story out there in the public, and that's scary. But I have received so much positive feedback from people who may not know exactly what it's like to walk in our particular shoes, but know what it's like to struggle with their kids in a million different ways and to feel alone. And I am really excited to be able to connect with people on that level. It's really important to me.
So you've had some great feedback, right? Have you had more people reach out to you? And talk about this?
Yeah, I do think it's really just opened some good doors for vulnerable conversation. And I always say, I think our vulnerability is what makes human connection worthwhile and what makes life worth living, right? And so I've been grateful to have that experience. Now, I will say my husband, who is my biggest supporter and biggest critic, he listened to all the episodes and he said, why didn't you say this? And why didn't you say this? And why didn't you say this? And I was like, buddy, get your own podcast appearance and you can say all the things
Come on.
you want to say. But no, I think the bigger point is that we've been through a lot in 3 years, and you do sort of start to uncover and remember things that were really pivotal and hard and challenging. And, can't talk about all of them, but just know that, there's lots of ups and downs in the process of recovery.
Yeah, I fully agree with you there, because I still get, it's a horrible analogy, but like numb flashbacks, right? Like you either block stuff out or you just forget. Like me being very ill, my brain didn't work, so I have no idea what was going on. But every now and again, like flashes will come up, and I was like, oh, yeah. But we could, and I hope you come back more and more and more, because you will uncover more and more. And having this podcast, I totally feel it's like free therapy. You're getting out everything. And for me, I don't care. There's no shame in my game, but I really applaud you. I'm a hot mess. Let's just be honest. But for you to come on and talk about something that a lot of people like don't air their dirty laundry, right? Everything's fine. Everything's great. Put that smile on. Nothing to see here. And yet it is so important, because there is power in numbers, right? This is how we heal. You need a community to heal. So if I could ask you, if we go back in time from when your daughter came out of, I always say in treatment, is that right? Like when she came out of the facility.
Yep. The treatment program.
What were your expectations? Like, did you have bigger expectations? Like, okay, she went here, they're going to flip a switch, everything's going to be fine and we can move on with our life. Did you know, because I know what happens when you come out of somewhere, did you see, and really it's like a tidal wave coming at you. Did you see that coming?
I did not in the very beginning. I think I mentioned that when her outpatient team recommended a higher level of care, I had no idea what that meant. I did think we would, admit her. She would be there for 10 or 12 days. She would come home and we would move on down the road. I would say day 2 is when I realized that's not going to happen. And it then became just an ongoing process of learning what, an eating disorder looks like and how ingrained these emotions are around all kinds of beliefs about ourselves that do have something to do with food in our bodies, but don't at the same time. And so it was a little bit like, peeling an onion as we were going down the road of treatment. So very quickly I realized, we're in this for the long haul.
So when she's out, you actually had to move somewhere to do, what's it, PHP? What's the full name for that?
It's partial hospitalization program. So any kind of treatment approach, and you see this in addiction as well, there's a step down process. So they go from the most intensive, the most comprehensive, and then they give you a little bit less intensity and see how that goes, and then a little less intensity and see how that goes. So the partial hospitalization part of treatment is, I always called it step down, is you no longer are staying there 24 hours a day, but you are still receiving a full day, 8 to 10 hours of meal support and education and therapy and dietetic support and all of those things. But then sleep at home at night, I think is the objective. For us, however, we were 3 hours away. And so home was an Airbnb with me and my daughter for that period of time, which ended up the first time she was in treatment being about 6 weeks.
So how does that look like? So she's going somewhere for 8 hours a day, coming home. What's her demeanor when she comes back? Is she just like, don't talk to me? Is she upset? Are you guys having good conversation? Are you
I think,
seeing that, the struggle there?
yes, I would say looking back, I think the PHP portion of treatment was the most challenging. Obviously, I was seeing more of her and kind of the struggle, the most challenging, but also the most healing part of the whole process. I would work during the day. I'm fortunate to have a job that, let me work remotely for that period of time. And then I would go pick her up and, I did a lot of grocery shopping to make sure that we had everything that she needed for her prescribed, um, you know, snacks and one meal a day and that kind of thing. And yes, most of the time, the first 45 minutes to an hour after I picked her up was rough. She would typically need to decompress quite a bit. A lot of times we went straight from the facility to the mall, or we went straight from the facility to TJ Maxx or Five Below or the bookstore or somewhere that she liked to go. So it was a lot of us just doing activities to kind of get her mind off of everything that was happening. And then we would come back to the place and have our snack together and find something on TV to watch. We watched a lot of shows during that period of time. And usually it was close to bedtime when, not every night, but that she would want to talk. And we had some really great conversations, and great sounds fun. Most of them weren't fun, but good conversations just about, her and how she was feeling and what she thinks is going to happen in the future and how I can be a better mom to her and what things are going to be like when we come back home. So I would never push that. I had learned enough by then not to be demonstrative in what I wanted to talk about. I would always kind of let her lead the way. But it was a really hard, but also beautiful time for us.
Well, that's great that she could be open with you. When she's telling you all this, are you thinking, okay, this is still the eating disorder is still very, very, very much alive? Are you understanding all this, or are you thinking, why is this still happening? I thought we should be further than this.
I I think I understood, um, but I also was concerned that we were at this portion of the treatment process, about to go home. And some of these things were kind of coming up along the way. And so I really had a pretty healthy fear of coming home. Even being in that environment, as much as I didn't like being separated from the rest of my family, and we were eager to have her home, I felt very protected there. And I would have, in retrospect, in the moment I was ready, but in retrospect, I probably would have stayed. Not that it was up to me, but I probably would have stayed in that space a little bit longer. One of the things that I think contributes to that is medication. So, not everybody who struggles with an eating disorder needs an antidepressant or some other kind of medication. But in our daughter's case, that was an important thing. Her depression was really the thing that was attacking her the most, I think, at this point of the treatment process. And we were still having conversations with her team about what medication was right. If you know anything about antidepressants, there's a whole slew of them, and one might work better than the other. And there are certain ones that are safer for adolescents, which she was at the time. And I just felt like we didn't have that riddle solved the way it needed to be solved just yet. And so that gave me a lot of angst. And it is sort of the thing that we focused on most in her second admission, that she says to this day is the most important contributing factor to her ability to get to where she is today, was dealing and managing her depression. So we had a different starting point that second time, right? Because we knew what hadn't worked the first time. So that was, a benefit there. But, going back to the question about the PHP portion of it, that was one of the things that I felt was a loose end that ended up being a really problematic one.
And a lot of depression medications make you gain weight, right? And already having to deal with an eating disorder and having to gain weight. Now you got some extra help. That sounds like help, right? Is she, and if you're comfortable answering this, taking her medication, or is she, I don't know if she did gain weight off a certain medication. Was she like, maybe I'm already having to do this. Now I'm getting kicked in the head again. Was she reluctant to keep taking the medication if that did happen to her?
Yes. I don't think that we had any indication that that was a side effect that she was experiencing. Obviously, she was weight restoring anyway, so I think it was probably hard to determine, what was contributing most there. But the fear was definitely there. And people talk about that. That's the number one thing people will say about an antidepressant. And so everything is fine now in that regard. I think she very much understands the value and has found the one that seems to do the most for her. But as soon as we got home from the first treatment stay, again, knowing that I was worried about this, she found ways to not take it. And so it was, 3 or 4 months probably when she put her foot down and said, I'm just not doing it anymore. So.
Yeah. And I think that's something that everyone deals with, antidepressants too. Not just like the weight gain, but you start to feel better and you're like, I'm normal now, don't need this. Right. And you just think everything's going to work. And then it kind of nosedives really bad. Right.
Right. I mean, there is this, when you're in your sickness, you don't want to be well, right? Like, people don't understand that dynamic. So it goes back to, we all talk about in this world that we know, you don't comment on people's bodies because that's a no-win situation for somebody who is struggling with an eating disorder. You can say you look really healthy. That's going to have bad implications for them. Or you can say you don't look the greatest, and that eating disorder feels satisfied by that. Like, oh, I'm doing a good job, right? So it is sort of the ultimate catch-22 when it comes to this disorder.
Yeah, and that's hard, right? Because when I was in the hospital, there was rules. No one was allowed to comment on what I looked like. No one was allowed to ask about my treatment thing. We were just supposed to talk about the weather and pretend I was like at Club Med, right? But those weren't my rules. Those were the doctor's rules, because as it was, I was already very, very, very ill. And they're like, we don't need anyone pushing you over the edge. And for someone with an eating disorder, I can tell you, when you tell someone, oh, you look healthy today, that translates to you look fat. And I know no one comes from it now with a healthy brain. No one's coming from it meanly. Like that's a nice thing to say, right? Unless you have an eating disorder.
Right. All they know is that you are taking steps to address the eating disorder. So why is it not logical that we would acknowledge the benefits and what we're seeing as sort of the positive outcomes of those steps? The biggest thing you just have to learn is like, it doesn't make sense, and don't step in it, right? Because that's a trap that you're never going to get out of.
So looking back on all this, what are your, like, if you can give like a top 5, top 10, top 2 things that you did right and things that you'd be like, oh, I wish I could take that back and do this?
So I think that's the biggest thing as a parent. I hear so many parents that, just don't really know what to do. And for us, it's been a journey of learning what our role is as parents and, what her role is as someone who ultimately has to be responsible for herself and her recovery. And also that's looked different in times of relative health and normalcy versus, maybe right out of treatment or when and if she's, been struggling. And so we've had to modulate in a variety of ways. But there are some really foundational things that I think are important for parents to know from our experience. And the first is just the importance of modeling a healthy relationship with food and your bodies. And I know Recovery Mom talked about this as well. When I told our story on the first podcast appearance, I said, we were really surprised that our daughter was struggling with an eating disorder because we thought we had a relatively healthy relationship with our own bodies and food in our home and those kinds of things. But when you see the world through this specific lens and you look back, I've probably been concerned about the way I look a little too much. And that impacts the way I talk about things. I have labeled foods good and bad. I went on Weight Watchers between my second and third baby. So all of those things send messages to her about her own self and what it means to be valuable in her own body. And so we have changed everything about how we manage ourselves and talk about things in our home. We don't talk negatively about our own bodies or anybody else's body. That's just something that gets shut down immediately in our home. And I make meals now that are inclusive of all the food groups, right? We just want to always send the message that all foods fit. And, all these things are really, really important because it gets us out of that do as I say, not as I do kind of argument. And we're also just showing her that food is safe. And that's so important. So I was thinking about this last week because I heard a story in a leadership training at work. So totally different context, but he was talking about modeling good leadership with your teams. And he told a story about growing up in a home where they took in foster children. And this one little boy had a lot of trauma in his past because of abuse. And specifically, he was scalded. And so, as you can imagine, bath time every night for this child was extremely challenging. And so the dad every night would run the water and say, "It's not hot, I promise." He wouldn't get in. And so it eventually occurred to him what he needed to do. And every night he started putting on his swim trunks and running the water and getting in first. And then he would say, "See, it's safe. Come in with me." And I thought that was such a good parallel to our experience as parents working with a child who is struggling with something that is traumatic to them. And so for me, that's my everyday now. My everyday is running the water, getting in the water, and saying, "See, it's safe. Come in with me." And that's really powerful. Now, the challenge with that, and Heather, you always say real, raw, honest talk. So this is real, raw, honest. The challenge with that is I'm in my late 40s. I'm not a 19-year-old athlete with the metabolism of a young person. And she has seen my body change over the past 3 years, and not insignificantly. And I worried about that. I was like, how am I telling her this is safe when she's looking at me and all her worst fears are happening to me? And then I realized there's an even more important lesson in that. Yes, my body has changed. So what? Yes, my body has changed and I'm still happy. Yes, my body has changed. I'm still enjoying life. Yes, my body has changed. I still go out in public and take pictures of me and our family, and I love hard, and I have hopes and dreams and goals. Because it doesn't define my happiness and it doesn't define my worth. And so that's the ultimate safety that I want her to learn and feel and experience in her life. And so it all fits together in a really profound and important way.
That is, I don't have words. That's like the most beautiful thing I've ever heard. That you showing her, look, yes, I'm changing. You know it. You are still above ground. Nothing bad happened. A meteor didn't come out and get you. And just showing this is life, and everyone comes in a different body, right? And that's really hard for an eating disorder to hear. Everyone comes in a different body.
Well, and bodies change over time. And that's one thing that I still probably worry about is, as well as she's doing now, she's at an age where she may get married soon-ish, not too soon. And then she'll want to have a baby. Bodies change when you get pregnant and after you have a baby and those kinds of things. And so it isn't situational, right? We have to learn that safety exists no matter what happens to our bodies.
Yeah, and especially like as a woman, it's just, your body's changed depending on your cycle. Your body's changed through puberty. Your body's change. Yeah, when you have a baby, things don't go back to where they used to be. And no matter how hard you try. Let's just be honest. We can't go in with Michael J. Fox, get the DeLorean, and go back in time, right? It's just never going to happen. What you look like at 18, you're not going to look like at 25. And what you look at 25, you're not going to look like at 50. It's just part of life, right?
Yep.
But to be miserable in this vessel for the rest of your life, it just sounds like hell on earth, right?
Right. And nobody wants that for ourselves, and nobody wants that for our kids either. So that was the first kind of big picture piece of advice that I would give. The second thing that we learned, and this was really, really hard for me, was to manage our own emotions in order to be really steady for her. Some people that might not be hard. For me, I can go from 0 to 60 or however fast a car can go in a few seconds. I'm very emotional and in all ways. And so that was really hard for me. And I wouldn't have even known that was important, to be honest, except for I was so grateful while our daughter was in treatment. They had a variety of parent education offerings every single week. And we were encouraged, not required, to go to them. There would be a dietitian session that talked about what their philosophy on food and nutrition and those kinds of things. There'd be a therapy session. There'd be a medical session. And they were all very informative. But my favorite one was on Fridays, and it was called Talk Back Boot Camp. And the whole purpose was to just let parents get on the phone and throw out mean, problematic, challenging things that their child had said to them that they know were driven by the eating disorder voice. And then the facilitator would role play and model how to respond to those things with a very like flat affect, but still validating their feelings and emotions, and then keeping yourself kind of, regulated in the process, which is really hard to do when you're getting, insults slung at you right and left. So, a scenario for us, might be if she got really, really upset and she would say, you're the worst mother alive. I hate everything about you. I can't believe you pretend to love me when you're doing, these X, Y, or Z things. And when you hear that, you want to go higher, right? She's here, you want to go here. And then it just goes like this and this. And, it would be my natural inclination to be like, I can't believe you're saying this about me of all people. I've done everything for you. I've sacrificed everything, all the things that are just going to create a fight, right? And instead, our job was to just be almost unbothered by what she was saying. So instead of what I would naturally want to say, I would say, I can tell that you are really upset with me right now, and I get that. But just know that I love you, and when you're ready to talk calmly about this, then I'm going to be right here. Done. And what that does is it deflates the eating disorder voice, because it's not getting the fight that really is what fuels it. And that was really a skill that when I first heard it, I was like, yeah. I'm telling you, it has come in so useful in so many situations, to the point where even my middle son sometimes will be like, why are you not freaking out about this right now? I'm like, maybe this is a situation I need to freak out about. I've just gotten, a lot better at kind of managing my emotions. Not in every situation. I'm not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but it has been a skill that's come in really, really useful.
And you bring up a good point, just so everyone understands. And for parents listening out there with kids with an eating disorder, you're not dealing with your child anymore. And this is what I see a lot. People are like, oh, my poor little Johnny, blah, blah, blah. This isn't, no, like your kid's taken over. And to have that, because I'm like you, like you're picking a fight with the wrong crazy person. And to just unplug it, like literally like unplugging the TV, done, walking away. You are, it's like shooting an arrow at the eating disorder. You really are attacking it, right? Because they want, the eating disorder wants you to say something and be like, see, I told you. And you can stay, and then it's just like a, what do you call it? Like a hurricane, right? It just keeps going and going and going like a funnel. And you're just going further and further down that drain.
Right. That's the other phrase that I remember from the parent educations about that very thing was, it's a trap, right? Mm-hmm. The eating disorder is expert at trying to manipulate everything around it. And the bottom line is you're just not going to win an argument with an eating disorder unless you have a strategy. So this is just something kind of to put in the toolbox. The other things that I feel like we have done well is really just giving her a lot of access to us, not only for distractions. I think I've talked about this before, that sometimes, especially right after meals, when my mom brain is like, let's clean up the kitchen, it is the time that we need to leave all the dishes and go thrifting, or, run an errand, or go straight to the couch and watch something that she's wanted to watch. And I've had to really kind of make myself shift to her needs in that regard. And also kind of the flip side of that, though, too, is making time for activities and spending time together in conversations that have nothing to do with an eating disorder. I've said it time and again, you can get so like microscopically focused on what's happening, especially when it's bad and it's scary, that it is all you think about, right? So remembering that your child is not their eating disorder. And if they like Taylor Swift, then let's talk about Taylor Swift. If, they found a new, I don't know, obsession of some kind, like we'll talk about that. And I think that is true for any kind of parenting situation or dilemma, but it's been really important in dealing with the issues at hand. And then the last thing is I've really just had to pick my battles. Again, when you're struggling, everything can be a fight, and not everything needs to be a fight, but it also can be acknowledged. And so I've learned to just say something, not expect a response, and let her think about it on her own terms. So for example, I noticed that you're choosing the healthiest item on the menu when we go out to eat. And I know you like to be healthy, and I can appreciate that about you. I just want you to think about challenging yourself every now and then, because I think that will be, best in the long run. Done. And most kids, if you say it differently or if you expect them to respond, they're going to come back with all the excuses or defense, what their defense is for themselves. But I'm just noticing something, and she can do with it what she chooses to do with it. So I think those are the overarching, like, big things that I think we've really had to learn and put into practice, no matter what, kind of her health status has been.
Yeah, my famous line is, the inmates don't run the prison. Right? So no, and don't negotiate with a terrorist. When your kid's fully engulfed in their ED, that's all you're doing. Right? So, but I like how you say that when you go out for dinner and say, hey, I'm noticing you wanting to be healthy. But it's very important, though, that parents understand this isn't being healthy. This is still driven by an eating disorder. Right?
Right.
So, and I like how you said, maybe we can add something in. So dessert's coming up, man. You better figure out what you want,
Right.
That's
it is. It's the hardest thing too, to kind of always differentiate between what people do because they like it and what people do because it's tied to the rules that they have for themselves that are driven by the eating disorder. And as a parent, you're always going to err on the side of danger, danger, danger. At the same time, you do have to make some room for preference as health starts to take over more than sickness. But it's something that I think I've tried to really do with her is, I'm no dummy, right? Like I notice everything that happens, and it may be nothing, but I want you to know that I saw it. I want you to know that I noticed it, and probably going to be worrying about it a little bit. So, again, she has to be responsible for herself, but I can be supportive in that way in the process.
Yeah, no, and I agree. Like, I love salad. Like, if I get taco salad, that makes me happy, right? But what I've learned now too is like, okay, well, now we're adding on a whole ton of sour cream, which makes everything so much better. I don't know why.
So much better.
But so much better. Life's so much better, right? But yeah, I like how you said, I'm noticing, and that does do something to slicker eating disorder. It's like, uh-oh, right? Not
I'm
so
exposed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right?
And then there are things, that when she was freshly out of treatment, or we would go back to them if she, were struggling more, that were really helpful. Like, she would never eat alone. We would always make sure that I was available, or her dad was available, grandma was available, whomever, to have meals with her. And that's both for accountability and also for distraction, right? Like there's games that we would play while we're eating. You never talk about really heavy, important things while you're eating and those kinds of things. And then, as time would go on and she would have to go back to school or, have work or whatever the case may be, then we might sort of transition into a FaceTime lunch together. And so just making sure that, she has that connection during those critical points in time was really important for us and for her. The other thing, and this is hard for people, is the scale. I don't know why I didn't just get rid of it from the get-go. Probably it was one of those silly things, like it was a really expensive scale that did all the, had all the bells and whistles and those kinds of things. But for a period of time, I hid it, and not just hid it, I would move it from one location to another location because I knew that if she found it, then, that would be disaster. So I just spent a lot of time finding new hiding places for the scale. And, eventually I was like, this is so dumb. I don't care about the $120 or whatever this great scale was. And I can remember that when I went to where she was in treatment, the second time to meet her for that PHP part of her treatment, I didn't even throw it in a trash can. I left it on the curb outside of Target because I thought somebody that wants this will pick it up and use it. But it was just a kind of an up and down experience with the scale. And we no longer have one. We will never have one. But I also take it a step further, and my mother or my mother-in-law, anybody that our kids kind of regularly go to their house, or if we visit somewhere, I'm not scared to say, like, if you have a scale, it needs to not be where anybody can see it. It just needs to not be there. Because I know that one look at that can make her spiral. So that's the other thing. And then, I think I still do this to some extent, but I really did a lot of it when she was really, really struggling. Is I just sent her daily texts, affirmations, memes that I found, anything that communicated to her, you're special and you can do this, and there's light at the end of the tunnel. And the thing about that is not that I did it, but I had to be prepared for radio silence in response. My kid's not a good texter. She's not a good communicator really in general, but on this kind of stuff, nothing. Like, I was never, ever, ever going to get a response. I just kept doing it anyway. I'm like, planting seeds, man, planting seeds. That's the thing that I have to think is important along the way. And then I think I mentioned it in the conversation about, talk back boot camp, but validation is really, really important. I think it is hard to understand sometimes what people who are struggling with an eating disorder are going through. And it's easy to say, yeah, but like, that doesn't make any sense. And there's no place for that, really. She could say, she thinks that the earth is square. And I will say, yeah, I can see how you might think that. Tell me more about why you think that. Versus, that's the stupidest thing I ever heard. We have all this evidence that it's not, right? And so again, just the kind of the switch in how you sort of deal with, particularly a kid who has a lot of strong emotions, is struggling through a lot that maybe she doesn't even understand herself. And so it's important to communicate, we're on the same team, right? Like we have different positions on this team, but we are on the same team.
Yeah, and all that like is gold on a platter for parents who are in this situation, right? It is important. I will totally agree with the distraction after eating. For me, the eating was one thing. It's the after, it's the thinking, it's the thoughts. This is why I started the podcast, right? It's the mental health that no one gets it. No one knows what is going on up in here. And distraction is key. And
For sure.
good for you for implementing things, because that it's so hard, right? And not a walk. I want to make sure that everyone understands this. If your kid has an eating disorder, we are not rewarding them with exercise. It is not a walk like a normal person would go take. Anyone with an eating disorder has this movement gene in them, and that is feeding the eating disorder. You got to sit, do a crossword puzzle, play Monopoly, play Yahtzee, do whatever, but not any form of exercise. Just thought I'd throw that out there.
Yeah, I think it's important to sort of know what your boundaries are related to exercise, related to kind of any other privilege, right? So I think it's really hard to think about support without thinking about accountability and without thinking about repercussions. And that gets really complicated, right? Because you're not trying to punish them for having an eating disorder. You're not trying to reward them for having an eating disorder. So there's some really complex dynamic in the middle there, and it's sometimes can feel really challenging to find.
Well, break out the Pictionary, because that's what's going on. Well, I can't thank you enough for coming and joining us today. Do you want to give everyone your handles on all social media?
Sure. So I am Wendy with a K with dots in the middle of each word on TikTok, and the label is Edie Warrior Mom, and I post a lot of content for parents, but also just about mental health and eating disorders in general. Love to connect with people.
Awesome. Well, thank you for joining us today. I hope to see you back again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's all for this episode of 1% Better. To continue the conversation, head over to our website at www.1percentbetter.ca, where you can access more stories and resources. We'd also love it if you subscribed and left us a review on your favorite podcast platform. And remember, friends, progress takes patience, perspective, and sometimes a little help from people who get it. So be kind to yourself and others as we work to get 1% better every day. We'll see you back here next week.